Hey, everybody. Welcome to the green room of DisrupTV. More importantly, we're live here from Davos and the last day of the World Economic Forum. I've got two amazing guests. I'm going to introduce them in reverse order of appearance. And they're going to tell me exactly where they're coming in from. And of course, what are they talking about today? So we'll start with you, Christopher. Where are you coming in from? What's hot?
Coming in from Guelph, Ontario, near Toronto. And I'm going to talk about all things artificial intelligence.
Oh, I never heard about it. That'll be great. Manar, what's going on? Where are you coming in from? What are we talking about?
From outside of Washington, D.C., and I'm going to talk about all things about flexibility in the workplace.
All right, these two things are coming to a clash. And of course, we're here live here with Vala Afshar, my co-founder, co-host, and best friend. And of course, Elle, our producer. And of course, we're going to kick it off. Elle, do the countdown and we'll kick off the show.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on DisrupTV. My name is Vala Afshar. I'm the Chief Evangelist at Salesforce. We welcome you to follow us on X at DisrupTV Show. Send us your questions live. We'll do our best to answer them. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Ray Wang. He's the CEO and founder of Constellation Research. He's the best-selling author of Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Ray's a regular television, tech, and business contributor. I see him on TV just about every day. Fox Business, Yahoo Finance, Bloomberg, CNBC, live this week while he was at the World Economic Forum Annual Summit at Davos. He's one of the most influential futurists on X at RWA and G0. Welcome, Ray Wang, to DisrupTV.
Hey, thanks a lot. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Vala Afshar. He's the Chief Digital Evangelist for Salesforce. He's also the author of multiple books, including Boundless, A New Mindset for Unlimited Business Success, and a #1 seller on Amazon. I don't have a copy with me at the moment. Executives around the world, pay attention to every one of his inspirational, insightful tweets. And of course, when he's not speaking or leading keynotes or events at Salesforce, you can see him on Bloomberg and, of course, ZDNet, and, of course, other publications and media outlets. But it's not about us. It's about our amazing guests. And today we have an amazing person to kick off a very, very important topic that every leader is thinking of. Who do we have to kick this off?
Ray, you don't take my book to Davos when you go? That's surprising to me.
No, the digital version.
It's a privilege for us to have Manar Morales, founder, CEO of Diversity and Flexibility Alliance, and the author of a new book that just came out this month, The Flexibility Paradigm, Humanizing the Workplace for Productivity, Profitability, and Possibility. Manar is national thought leader and visionary on building human-centered workplace cultures at the intersection of diversity, flexibility, and well-being. Manar is the founder, president, and CEO of the Diversity and Flexibility Alliance, a think tank that collaborates with organizations to transform culture. Manar is member of the President's Council of Cornell Women and the International Women's Forum. Again, author of a new book published this month, The Flexibility Paradigm. The Flexibility Paradigm posits that in order to create the return on experience required for flexibility, leaders and managers need to shift their perspective and recognize flexibility as a way to strengthen their organizations. Welcome, Manar, to DisrupTV.
Thank you. I'm excited to be with both of you today.
Thank you so
We're
much.
excited to have you here. And of course, I mean, there is nothing more important. We've noticed that in the last 5 years, the amount of change has been so great. Organizations are responding to all different types of external forces and internal forces that they would never have single thought about. And so really, there's a lot of concepts in your book. Let's start with one of them. What is presenteeism? And how do companies misinterpret it? Because you say this happens all the time.
Yeah, so I think when we're thinking about a form of flexibility around hybrid or virtual work, what we're seeing is this idea of, if I'm present within the office, this idea that face time is somehow an indicator of commitment or performance. And so really thinking about, just because people are in the office doesn't necessarily mean they're working, right? We all have computers, we have gateways to be doing a lot of different things. And so really focusing on presenteeism over purpose is a real challenge in today's environment.
And this happens all the time because organizations have always assumed that face time is key to success. But if you look at professional services firms all around us and look at the way work is being done, I mean, this has been evolving over years, right? And you studied a lot of this in terms of the capabilities for your book. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at flexibility, I mean, certainly flexibility is not a new concept. I know that COVID has enhanced the discussion around flexibility. It's been around for a lot longer than, I date back. The history of flexibility has been long in existence. But this idea that, focusing really on what is it that people are doing when they're in the office, as you mentioned, professional services firms, right? We focus on output, we focus on impact. That's how we know when people are working, right? Those are the things that we should be focused on, not just presenteeism or face time.
Can we talk about range of flexibility? I think about the last 10 years, I've been a remote worker. But the last 10 years was a point in my career where I was a senior executive. I was a chief marketing officer, chief customer officer before I joined Salesforce. So I had 10 years of executive leadership responsibilities with budgets and line of business and hiring and firing and bringing products and services to market. So I felt like the last 10 years I had the experience to earn that flexibility of being a remote worker and still produce at a high level. I hope my managers agreed that that's still true, for produce at a high level. But when I think about the first 10 years of my career, man, do I appreciate those random collisions with folks that ended up being my sponsors, my mentors. More importantly, sponsors. I mean, I love mentors, but people that put their career, their political and social capital on the line to give me a stage to share my thoughts, to give me budget, to give me freedom to experiment. And those were truly random collisions that I don't think would have happened if I had tremendous flexibility afforded to me early on. So I'm wondering, does it matter where you are in your career in terms of the elasticity of the flexibility that you'd want in order for you to have the trajectory that allows you to get to your full potential?
I think the important thing is to be looking at, first of all, is that it's not one size fits all, right? So there's different forms of flexibility that people can have. And the second thing around a principle around flexibility is it's also not a trade-off for performance. And so we really have to be thinking about wherever you're working, you're still performing, you're still connecting, you're still collaborating, you're still building those relationships. And it's interesting, Val, because you talk about this idea of, right, those people call them those water cooler moments. We might not have water coolers anymore, but those ideas of those random collisions that you built relationships with through. But there are a lot of people who don't have that experience, right? This idea that there are people from various backgrounds who say, nobody was coming by my office and telling me to go out to lunch, or coming off and saying, let me develop a relationship with you. And so I think it's really important to be thinking about what the differing experiences are. And actually, can we be more intentional about helping to build those relationships in a way that everybody can benefit? So for example, if we're using Zoom as a meeting, let's say, I can drop people into what I call a choreographed connection. I can drop them into a breakout and I can get them to meet somebody they wouldn't have otherwise met, right? Especially if you think about organizations that are distributed, right? They have multiple offices. Suddenly I get to meet somebody based in California who I would have never built a relationship with. Or as a leader, I get to interact with somebody on my team who doesn't sit right next to me, but I can develop the relationships. So I think the important piece of it is really around how do we be intentional around flexibility so that we are building those relationships. And then the last thing I want to say is too, is that flexibility is a responsibility. There's a responsibility on the part of organizations. How do you create the infrastructure, the things that they need in order for it to succeed? It's a responsibility on the part of leaders to how do I lead my team? How do I think about who I'm building relationships with? How am I developing? How am I providing opportunity? And then it's a responsibility on the part of the individual who's working in that way. Am I being visible? Am I building relationships? Am I not, forgotten? Am I getting the opportunities? Am I not sitting in silence and just head down and working, but I'm not being known? I'm not building the things that I need to, building the kinds of relationships that I need to be building in order to develop. Am I earning trust with people? All of the things that you mentioned that are all keys to success, but we can do them in a variety of ways.
Yeah, it's a great point, especially when you're talking about building this out, because most people and some older workers and folks are afraid about flexible workplace arrangements for those reasons, right? They're afraid they're going to lose that connectivity, the social infrastructure, and of course, other parts of the workplace dynamic that you're talking about here. How do people get around that? How do people overcome those fears?
Yeah. Well, one, I think, is to give voice to them. I always say whenever I'm working with an executive team or a leadership, I'm like, let's give voice to what we actually think flexibility is so that we can have a conversation around all of those fears. What are you most concerned about? And, I talk about it in the book. I wrote an article for HBR on it, but this idea of the myth of the 5 C's, that loss of connection, loss of culture, loss of contribution, loss of control, loss of, collaboration. And we say, you're right to be concerned about all of those things, right? Like, if not done right, you will absolutely experience that if you are not intentional in the way that you design it. And so really in the book, and what I talk about is that we need this framework. Like, when we've been working with organizations, I've worked with hundreds of organizations in the past, and part of the membership too, is talking about like, what's the purpose? Like, what do you want to get out of the flexibility? Why is it important? It's a business imperative. So we have to design it in a way that you get the benefits of it so that everybody wins.
Where do you see the trend? Do you see, in terms of like employees, do they see a value in terms of returning to the office? And what do employers need to do to demonstrate that it's worth the effort? It's worth, my company's hybrid. So depending on your function, again, I've been remote for 10 years, but I have colleagues that go in the office 1 or 2 days a week. I have some that go every day because, there are folks that I mentor that are, again, younger, recent graduates. They love the energy, the chaos, the noise. They don't want to be in their apartment. So I see all of the entire spectrum as part of my experience working at my company. But what do employees think about in terms of the value of going back to the office?
I think if you look at, we have 5 generations in the workplace, right, for the first time, and we're looking at all of the generational differences that we might see, but also we don't want to make assumptions about what everybody wants and needs. So I think it's really around this idea of, I talk in the book about the importance of that yes and mindset, which is, yes, I might be super energized about being in the office, and somebody else might be super drained by being in the office, right? Because of the experiences they're having. So how do we build that workplace where we can think about what do our employees want and need and provide the kind of flexibility without forcing and imposing? And it doesn't mean that you don't have guardrails. It doesn't mean that you don't have a policy that drives it, right? But in a hybrid environment, how do we provide the kind of autonomy that people want? But about what you're talking about, right? This idea that, I enjoy times of going into the office, and I would say that return on experience. What's the ROE? If I'm in the office, how am I going to make it different than when I'm working from home? And when I'm home, how do I get the value of working from that? And really be intentional, both as you design it as an organization, but also as you design it as an individual. Like, go up and, go out to lunch, go meet people when you're in the office. Go do what I call telecommuting from the office, right? I go in, I sit behind my desk, and I'm head down, and I'm on Teams meetings or Zoom meetings all day, and I'm not getting the benefit of being in the office. And I think that's where the resentment builds, is where people who are saying, like, you're calling me back into the office just so I can be on Teams all day. And nothing is different from where I'm working.
Can I just read to you just an hour ago or so, and I'm not going to name the individual, but he's he built one of the most successful companies in Boston.
Yep.
This is what he just put on X. The CEOs of the fastest growing startups are doing the following. 1, 100% in the office. 2, very, very lean headcount. 3, most homegrown exec teams. 4, shooting at $1 trillion. Unicorns are dead, meaning billion is no longer a stretch goal. And then 80 plus hours per week. But he starts with 100% in the office. Now, this is a guy who's built a multi-billion dollar, the most successful public company in the Boston area in the last 50 years. What are your thoughts when when you see a CEO of a super successful company who's now investing in unicorns, say something like that?
It's interesting to me because I think one of the things is I will say, and then there are CEOs who are saying, when we invested in this kind of flexibility, we saw an increase in retention, we saw an increase in recruitment, we saw an increase in our productivity. And so a lot of the times I think about, are you actually measuring or are you just saying what you prefer? And is that just based upon that's true for you and what your preference is? The other thing I will say is that, for startups and other companies, I'm like, at the heart of flexibility is innovation. And so this idea that you don't innovate in the way that you work, if you don't take advantage of technology and what it can do for you in an organization, and this idea that it's just one model, and that's often only driven by the perception of that CEO of what they think works for them. And I always think you have to think about all of your talent and think about the talent that you have and what they want. And what does that model, who does that model only work for, right? 80 hours a week, we're just going to be all in the office, right? Who are you leaving out when you think about that model too?
Yeah.
There is a lot of that. I think everybody has their model, just like in leadership, that people have their leadership styles.
Yeah.
And as you're talking about, there's choices. And I believe that's why you created the Flex Success Framework, right? So let's talk about the 5 R's. It's reflect, reimagine, redesign, reinforce. No, reintegrate, reinforce.
Yeah.
And those are ones that you were kind of put into place. So.
Yeah. And the point of it was the first one on reflect was, I don't think we change the minds of leaders and change an organization if we just talk about adaptation, right? How do you adapt to change without really first actually evolving your mindset around what does flexibility do for us? What's its purpose? The biggest mistake organizations make is they'll often come to me and say, well, what should our policy be, right? Like, we want to just talk about the policy. And I say, you actually have to back up and say, what's your purpose first? What can flexibility do for you as an organization? And then the reimagine is really about talking about who do you want to be? Like, what do you want your people saying about you? What do you want your clients saying about you, your customers, et cetera? What do you want the world saying about you? What do you want your peers saying about you? All of those things, to be really thinking about, what does flexibility make possible for us as an organization? Let's future focus.
I think that's really important, right? If you're doing moonshot projects, what Vala described, that's the type of organization we see as the pattern. But if you're trying to sustain long-term customer experience or long-term operations, you could not run a project like that. Everybody would burn out.
Right. And burnout is at an all-time high. Right. So that's not possible. Right. We're already seeing that. Right. But I think that idea of that, how are you really thinking about what do you want to be? What do you want your people to be? And who do you want within your groups? And what do you want that flexibility to do for you? Then you can design. And I think where we see a lot of mistakes happening, because the designing the policy built on a strong foundation, you then can go to, okay, well, how do I integrate it? Because I think what happens is most of those organizations that are failing, it's not a failure of flexibility, it's actually a failure of implementation. Is that they didn't integrate it. They sort of dropped these hybrid policies, remote policies into a co-location model, and they just kind of hoped it would work. And they didn't really change anything about how they were doing things. And it's not going to work unless you're really intentional about, do we have the policies? Do we have the practices? Have we trained our people? Have we set out a set of principles so we have guardrails up about what we're talking about in order for it to succeed? And then that last step is really, how are we measuring? In order for flexibility to work, I say you have to be intentional, it has to be inclusive, and it has to be iterative.
Wait, Taco Tuesdays wasn't enough? I'm just kidding.
I love Taco Tuesdays.
We haven't had one in 10 years.
Right.
Fortunately, I work for a company that they feed us really well. But yeah, please don't confuse perks as like some sort of a culture. It's not. But I have to say, even though the company valuations are at all-time high, unemployment under 4%, in general, it seems like a healthy environment. I would probably say 7 out of 10 CEOs or executives that I collaborate with, they're in wartime mode, not peacetime mode. They're very intentional about EBITDA or profitability and margin. They're very intentional about efficiency and productivity. They're becoming more lean, not just because of reduction in headcount, but investments in technology where software is doing some of the work. Very soon, most of the work. And in our lifetime, it could be entire lines of business that are being automated. So they have this wartime mentality. When you're advising CEOs, how does your approach in terms of flexibility vary when you realize I'm in front of a wartime board and executive team, and they're very deliberate about measuring outcomes, and so versus some that are, have a little bit more maybe flexibility to experiment and try new policies and programs. How does that speed vary when you're in front of varying leaders and different mindsets?
Two things, I think. One is that is where you have to really double down on what flexibility can do for you, right? Mm-hmm. And that is where you also need to double down on, I need the talent. I need top talent. I don't need just the talent that are willing to only work in the office, right? Because that limited my talent pool. The idea is that flexibility actually broadens your talent pool. So that I will say that actually in those times, it's the most important to say flexibility is our competitive advantage and can be a driver of productivity for us. It can be a driver of diversity. It can be a driver of profitability. And therefore we need to get it right. We don't have time to mess around, and we need to actually implement it in a way that gives us all of those advantages. And I will tell you, the CEOs that are doing it, they're measuring. They're not doing it as a perk. They're not doing it as, out of the goodness of their heart. They're saying, I see a real tangible benefit to this. We had Wendy Davidson, the CEO of Hain Celestial. She talks about bottom line numbers that flexibility has actually done for the company, and why she invests in it, why she supports it as a leader, to say, I see the bottom line impact of this. It's why we do it.
Let's actually hit that question real quick. Measure, monitor, and iterate. That's what you mentioned in one of the chapters. How do people do that right? Because most people put the program in and then they're like, "Oh, what happened?"
Right.
And a lot of people.
And what's the time horizon when they're measuring? Are they benchmarking where they expect 90-day, like a quarterly result, biannual?
Yeah.
What's
You're benchmarking all of the time, I will say. And the ways in which you benchmark are the things around, let's look at our recruitment numbers. First of all, you benchmark around purpose. Why did you do it in the first place? What did you think flexibility was going to provide for you? And then let's benchmark against that. So did we think we were going to get a greater, pool of talent? Is that true? What are we doing? And so did that impact us there? Do we think productivity was going to go up? Let's measure productivity around it. Let's measure what I think leaders often forget is there's a disconnect. I say sometimes the leader landscape doesn't match the talent landscape. Let's pay attention to what our talent is thinking. There are a lot of people who would say, some other company would have to pay me 40% more in order for me to leave the flexibility I have behind here. Like, what are your people? What are your engagement numbers? And then you go to the why behind it, right? Because people will automatically knee-jerk be like, oh, well, it's, we're seeing a decline here, and that's because of flexibility. As opposed to saying, look, if it's, have we aligned, is it a purpose problem? Oftentimes when I'm working with companies, I'm saying, I can analyze and tell you it was a purpose problem. You didn't set the right purpose. Is it a policy problem? Your policy wasn't clear. You didn't have clear guidelines. You didn't create a set of principles around it. Is it a people problem? In other words, either individuals are not engaging in the way. There's a lot of bad behavior happening out there. Let me be clear too. That can cause, companies to think flexibility doesn't work, whether it's, people showing up to meetings all the time and don't have their camera on and aren't engaging or not available. I say those are all performance issues. Those are not flexibility issues. But then you have to look at that. And so really paying attention to that and measuring. So measure bottom line numbers so you can see the impact that flexibility is having, but then find out the why behind it. And if it's a performance, you need to address the performance.
Makes sense. Policy, people, performance.
Purpose and practices.
And certainly purpose and practice. Yeah, makes total sense.
That measurement is a good piece, and I think I really want to end by talking about these flexibility initiatives. It's going to get more interesting, especially as we incorporate AI into how we actually augment what human work looks like, figure out what decisions are actually going to be automated versus human requirements, and so we're going to expect more flexibility in the workplace. What do you suggest to folks as we enter that world of AI?
I mean, I think that idea is, what does technology make possible for us? Right? That is the idea of, instead of resisting what technology can do, is the idea of coming from the question of, look, we don't have to agree to. I think one of the things I talk a lot about is the idea is that you as an organization don't have to agree whether AI is good or not good. You have to get to higher ground, is what does AI make possible for us as an organization? What does technology make possible for us as an organization? What does flexibility do? And how does that technology enable us to be better at what we need to be doing? So I think technology coming into the question of flexibility, technology has enhanced our ability to be flexible in the work environment, really in ways that, if you think about, if COVID had hit 20, 30 years ago, what would we have all done and survived as organizations?
You're absolutely right. I was giving a keynote to 16,000 employees at a company a couple of days back. And basically, the CEO said this amazing thing. He said, you all now have the power of AI in your hands. You're going to be using it every day. You're going to have all the tools you need to be able to do that. And the companies who have the tools and don't use it are the ones that are going to be left behind.
Yeah.
So, which was pretty cool. Here with Manar Morales, founder and CEO, Diversity and Flexibility Alliance, and the author of The Flexibility Paradigm, Humanizing the Workplace for Productivity, Profitability, and Possibility. Book came out January 2nd. Get it on Amazon. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you
Thanks
so much.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Very important topic, very important book.
It's going to get even more important. I mean, so.
Yes. Our next book has the word God in the title, so it doesn't get any more important than that. Dr. Christopher DiCarlo, author of Building a God, The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence and Race to Control It. Christopher is a philosopher, he's an educator, he's an author. Christopher is senior research and ethicist at Convergence Analysis, a UK-based think tank, researching and advising the public and politicians on AI risks and governance. Christopher is also the principal and founder of the Critical Thinking Solutions, a consulting business for individuals, corporations, and nonprofits in both the private and public sector. His new book, which also launched this month, In Building a God, Christopher explores the profound implication of AI surpassing human intelligence, a destiny that seems not just possible, but inevitable. Certainly, we heard about all of this all week at Davos. Welcome, Christopher, to DisrupTV.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Christopher, actually, you pull from a lot in the book, right? You intersect science, you intersect philosophy, ethics, and really sociology all coming at the same time. Talk about some of the elements, leading ethical theories that we should integrate with AI, because ethics is very cultural to some extent.
It is. There are two levels in which we need to look at ethics here. What is the ethics of the humans who are going to be using it? And what guidelines should they be following? And how do we come to a decision on what would that be? What would that look like? But also, in programming the machine, how do we determine what ethical precepts, morals, principles it should be following? What guardrails should be in place to make sure that it acts accordingly, to the way in which we want, the AI to essentially function and carry out, its behavior.
Some of the most spirited debates I saw at Davos this week was around ethics and AI. Andrew Yang, these are Turing winning, like equivalent to Nobel Prize winning AI practitioners and experts who've been in the space for decades. I mean, PhDs running multi-billion-dollar labs, and they can't agree amongst themselves in terms of the opportunities and the dangers of AI. And I saw an hour-long debate of, again, these are considered godfathers of AI, And some are talking about in labs, watching not AI that they would consider AGI or super intelligence, but AI that is self-modifying, trying to be and exhibiting behavior that wasn't coded by and trained by humans in order to stay relevant, in order to beat the game. And so how do we guarantee that folks creating the machine intelligence can actually maintain those guardrails? Because it appears that these folks that are, again, godfathers of this technology are not sure whether it's something we can monitor and control.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, right? The best way to move forward is to try to figure out how we're going to essentially have registries, right?
Mm-hmm.
We put together registries. We talk about things like soft nationalization. How heavy-handed do we want the government weighing in on this, right? And then how do we structure the developments from a kind of a municipal to a state to a national to an international level of who's doing what? Transparency is key. Cooperation is key. Thank goodness for Thomas Hobbes, who said, look, if we don't all get a contract together and agree on that contract and then have a sovereign who can consequence, for those who violate the contract, we're going to be in trouble. So what he was referring to is so important today, which is if we all cooperate with the power of AI, we're all going to do better. If some of us cheat and some of us try to use it for whatever personal gain, it could really come back, to affect us all. So cooperation is actually key. So there's actually almost key libertarian type principles baked right into the development of AI.
Yeah, but historically, looking at like the web technological wave or the social network technological wave, there's really no precedence that government entities and policymakers understood the dangers and the negative impact and proactively got ahead of it. And this is a technology that's far more sophisticated, evolving far more faster. The velocity, speed, and direction of what we've witnessed in just the last 5 years is unlike anything in my 30-year in tech. So, 15 years after crypto, and we're still not sure whether it's the right store of value or not. And we're debating. Meanwhile, it's nearly a $4 trillion market. How do we, and we see policymakers question some of our technology company leaders. And it's very clear for us technologists listening in that some of the policymakers, folks we've elected into office, have absolutely no clue about technology. Zero.
You're right.
So anyway, I don't have really a question there. I just think that this is a new world, and I'm hopeful that business, the private sector, takes lead.
Yeah.
In terms of understanding risks and rewards, because I don't think I can. Historically, I can't rely on the public sector to drive that conversation and outcomes.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it is racing ahead at light speed, and we're trying to catch up. And the org I work for, Convergence Analysis, there's many of us that are very concerned about how do we get the message across that policymaking is super important, and it has to happen very, very quickly. Because if it doesn't, we're dealing with not just the internet.
Yeah.
We're dealing with something that is a very, very powerful system in and of itself. And as such, once that system becomes more and more powerful and potentially reaches the level of what we call AGI, or artificial general intelligence, that will be the game changer, right? That will be the game changer in terms of money-making capacity and defense initiatives. So major dual use, productivity, and big tech is racing ahead, right? They want to be the first to get there because they see, a lot of potential for what it will be able to do. But what the world doesn't really know yet is that as they're racing forward to build these super, super intelligent machine like gods, we don't know what's going to happen when AGI is developed. We have no idea. Will it become autonomous? Will it become agentic? That is to say, an agent in and of itself. Will it become sentient? Will it become conscious? We're at a point in the history of our species where we're in between the way we used to do things and the way we're gonna do things. And we're in the middle right now. So the tide is low and the waters are kind of level, but there's a tsunami on the horizon. And it's kind of far off, but it's coming at 300 miles an hour. And we better get ready because none of us has any idea what's going to happen when Altman or whomever make that break point to AGI.
So Christopher, there are a lot of things that you talked about using, if we're thinking about the Leviathan theories at Hobbes. Those for social contracts are important. But we just took the, AI executive safety order and just ripped it up and threw it out the door. And about 48 hours ago, that thing just went out the door.
It did.
And so, but by doing that, right, we basically said, is it holding us back? Is it unleashing our ability to get there? And as you know, ethics is really hard, right? It's really in the eye of the beholder as to where those ethics go. And so you can easily go in any direction. So if you think about general attributes, we're either building a system that's benefiting the system, benefiting the individual, or has a give-take model, right? As we go from things that are, I'd say, persuasive to consensual to what you might say is, mindful for the individual. The system's not necessarily designed to benefit us because at this point we have AI systems that are centralized, that are scarce, that are closed, that are designed for a few, and more importantly, more expensive over time. And so this is the entirely opposite from where the internet was, where it was decentralized, lots of players, cheaper, more opportunities, and actually, it was actually an open system. So by design, we've already chosen that we want forced scarcity, centralized scarcity versus decentralized abundance. So we've already made that choice. So how do you get out of it? Because in order to play an AI, it's a scale game. It's about getting massive amounts of data. It's about cornering the world's energy supply. It's about chips, right? These are things that small countries are going to fall behind on very, very quickly.
Yes.
So
they're already behind.
They are.
There's really two players in the world.
That's it.
Well, China, like nuclear power. This is like nuclear power. Yes.
There's a duopoly in this space, and it's going to stay that way for a long time.
I know nothing about duopolies.
Yeah. You're right. But the world has always kind of been like that, right? There's always those who are always going to succeed more and those who will fall behind. What I think is important to remember is if we can get the very best that AI will have to offer humanity and other species as well, and mitigate the risk of what the worst, can never become, I think that's really the holy grail of AI. And that's what everybody really wants. But the problem is, humans are going to have to grow up really, really fast. And I mean, grow up intelligently and grow up ethically. It's taken us a long time to try to understand that cooperation is key to benefit. So the last time you guys were driving on a busy highway and you encountered a traffic jam, we know theoretically what would get us through that traffic jam is if everybody cooperated and followed 3 algorithmic principles, right? 2 car lengths in front of you. Don't change lanes unless you have to get off, right? And keep the constant speed that the person in front of you is doing. If everybody followed those 3 principles, guess what? Everybody would get to where they want to go faster.
Sure.
But it's those guys who cut in and out and think that they can go faster. And then you get this undulation of idiots, constantly back and forth and taking forever. We know cooperation is key and that it works. Getting the humans to understand that and to practice it is going to be our greatest challenge globally.
Yeah, and you need to have foresight. You need to, like the driving example. I often think about designing for positive externalities. When the web was launched in 1993, most of us didn't think it was going to give birth to e-commerce. It's going to give birth to Uber and Airbnb and Netflix, and we can now get food delivered to our home from our favorite restaurants. All these external outcomes as a result of this thing called web. And when I think about, you use the word autonomous and vehicle as an example. If you were designing an autonomous vehicle with a people-first mindset, you'd always have a steering wheel, because a people-first mindset would assume operator would be a person. But to truly get to level 5 autonomy in a car, you no longer need a steering wheel. But to design for level 5 autonomy, you have to have an AI-first methodology, not a people-first methodology. Now, that doesn't mean you put people as a secondary goal, because the promise of autonomous vehicles where the operator is now smart software, you're assuming less accidents, less injuries. So your purpose is driving safely, but the only way you can get to level 5 where you no longer have a steering wheel is to have an AI first mindset, not a people first mindset. And I believe businesses are going to become autonomous by having only an AI first mindset, which means my call center in 5 years is agentic AI soup to nuts. A notion of a minimum viable cost center. If you're not a revenue generating function, you're going to be 99% automated. And yes, there'll be 1% people that'll help fine tune the models and ensure there's a talking head that can describe our actions and outcomes.
There's actually a Twilight Zone episode that covers this very, very thing.
But without an AI first mindset, you would continue to put steering wheels in a car. Right. And that's not what level 5 autonomy is about.
No.
So my question to you, I guess, is, to me, agentic is here now. Autonomous is in the very near future. I mean, very self-driving businesses. How do you ensure that? How do you recognize the importance of an AI first mindset, and at the same time not lose sight of the fact that you want to create an environment where people can still have a sense of belonging and mattering, and frankly have a role? Have a role. I don't know if I would tell my 14-year-old son to study accounting anymore.
I get that. That's a great question. I get that all the time, right? In public lectures, people will say, so what should my grandkid major in?
Oh, yeah.
Right? In 4 years, is his job going to be obsolete? And now he has to, do it all over again. And further to what you were saying earlier, companies, are going to use this. They're going to use it, and those who don't are not going to be able to compete. Right. So we're on this trajectory, and it's going, and we can either join or we can be left behind. Right. And that's just the hardcore reality of it. Right. It's like saying, okay, what kind of businesses can work without the net today? Yeah. Go ahead, try. Right. It's not going to be easy. The question you have about the more human capacity, about what are we going to do with all these humans now? They're all out of work. So the org that I work for, Convergence Analysis, we're actually writing white papers on this right now to say, get ready, because maybe UBI isn't a bad idea. Maybe what we're going to have to do is figure out, you're out of a job. You've been replaced by this thing that works 24/7 at such a fraction of the cost we're paying you. It would be foolish for us not to use it, because then we can't compete with companies A, B, and C. So we're sorry you're out of work, but that's just business. That's just the evolution of business. No, we better start thinking now about how that landscape is going to evolve and how it's going to affect people. So a topic area that I mentioned briefly in the book that I think we better look at very, very soon, and I'm actually writing an op-ed on it right now, is what is this going to do to the mental health of the world as we move forward? And as entire countries fall behind, how are we going to have wealth redistribution, right? Have we thought about that, right? I mean, You know, what about centralization? What about who's controlling the shots, right? You know, and we've got a lot of work to do in a very compressed period of time. And here's one more thing to think about. And this speaks to your concern, Ray, about the ethics, and isn't ethics just a matter of opinion? In terms of autonomous vehicles right now, we're having a great deal of difficulty telling the machine, as you're driving and a crowd suddenly runs onto the street in front of you and you're going to hit someone, who should you avoid? And in North America, it's don't hit kids. Hit the elderly if you have to. But when you go to Japan, it's the opposite. Don't hit the elderly.
Oh, yeah, that's the cultural piece.
Who's right? And can you take your values with you when you travel and say, I want the moral parameters of this autonomous vehicle changed to suit my views? Or is it like, no, pal, when in Rome, right? It's, you're here, so get used to it. So there's a lot of really, really, you know, interesting and difficult problems we're going to have to work through in a very compressed short period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to, that dilemma, that scenario. I mean, it'll certainly be more deterministic in an algorithm because you will have weighted preferences assigned to a particular scenario, whereas three of us could make three different decisions depending on.
That's right.
You know, our background, our thinking, our philosophies. And I'm not sure if a more deterministic model is better for society. But yeah, no, these are you know, I do know one thing in terms of advising my three kids. I don't think in my 30-year career there's ever been a universal requirement other than maybe a college degree for the type of work that I have been involved in high tech. Although in my company 5 years ago, we said we no longer need college degrees to work at Salesforce.
Right.
But you know, ability to read and write, and I guess degrees don't matter. But I do think moving forward, regardless of what function, certainly, let's say white collar work, you better have AI proficiency.
Yes.
I don't know how any company that's looking to bring someone in sales, marketing, commerce, support, human resources, engineering, R&D, supply chain, if you don't have AI proficiency, I don't know how you're going to get through the door. And in my lifetime, I can't think of like cloud computing, mobile, IoT. I can't think of any technology that was universally a requirement for you to get a job. But this technology, I think, will be that. So yes, continue to have high rate of learning and good judgment. At the end of the day, we want to hire people that have high rate of learning and good judgment. But you better have some AI proficiency. Or you're not going to find work, in my opinion. I don't know, Ray, your thoughts.
No, actually, it's more important for you, Christopher, as you're thinking about that. I mean, I'm pretty much in the realm of camp that if the systems are designed for the individual, we'll have a different outcome. The systems are designed for the central planning agency, we get a different outcome. Every organization and government's going to operate differently. Chaos theory is in effect, right? The randomness of every human action collectively.
Game theory, chaos theory, network, systems thinking. Man, critical thinking is now more needed than ever before.
Thank you.
Yeah. I saw
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where we are, right? I mean, this is the challenge, right? I mean, the ethics of situations are going to change. Like I often use that example where I talk about, you know, a autonomous vehicle hits a dog in Canada. You know, they take care of the dog, make sure everyone's okay, check in with the owner, you know, pay the fine, and you know, apologize profusely. Right? Autonomous vehicle hits a dog in somewhere Eastern Europe, no cameras. What dog runs it over 3-4 times and leaves? Right? Make sure the dog is dead. Autonomous vehicle hits a dog in China, lots of cameras. You know, it's $500 fine if the dog dies, $10,000 to pay for medical bills. I don't know what's for dinner, right? So I mean, and each of these could be okay. I mean, in every one of these countries, they'll be like, of course you do that, right? And so the ethics are hard, but we do have governing principles, right? And you talk about a need for a AEA, like kind of the Atomic Energy Commission, kind of do that. I mean, there are level 1 ethics that I believe, Vala, you remember David Bray and I put together. Like, you need transparency of algorithms. You need the ability to explain the decision so that a human can understand it. You need to be able to reverse and unlearn things when you make mistakes. You've got to be able to, train these systems to get to the level of precision you're okay. And of course, you want a human in the loop, because if you don't do that, you end up with, like, I don't know, I mean, the overlords are going to take over. Yeah. So, I mean, but even that's not enough. So what would that AEA look like, Christopher?
Well, I think the way in which government should work is, trickle up. So what are you doing at the local level? What are you doing at the state level? How is the country monitoring it? And then how is the international agency looking at it? So the real heavy lifting should be done at, those kind of local areas, and there should be compliance at those various areas. But then an international governing body should develop. So basically in the 1990s, I was trying to build what Altman and the gang are building in Texas, essentially right now. And I could never get enough backing, could never get enough funding to do this kind of thing. But I knew it was the future of information, right? It was a part of information theory. And, I called it the OzTalk project, the onion skin theory of knowledge. And I knew if I wasn't going to build this thing, somebody someday was going to build it. And I was worried because I'm a professor of ethics and I teach critical thinking. And surely I know what should go into such a machine, right? You have that hubris, you have that capacity to think that you know better than anyone else. But the fact of the matter is, none of us knows, right? So then we have to have that conversation and dialogue now. When I wanted to build my machine, I wanted to start with philosophers, economists, historians, various people within the arts and humanities to discuss what would this machine be like? What should it not be like? And then we go to the electrical engineers, then we go to the computer scientists to then build the thing, but only after we figured out what the the parameters for such a machine would be. But I never wanted my machine to go out into the internet, the entire internet, and learn and train on that. I wanted to make it a closed system. I wanted to box it so nobody gets in and nothing gets out, right? And still make a very powerful system. But I wanted to solve scientific problems. I wanted to cure diseases with this thing. I wanted to help solve world hunger and climate change and the really big issues. But when you send this thing out into the entire net,
it's polluted.
Yes,
it's dirty water.
And the biases, right? Like I wanted to make what I called an LBIS, right? A least biased information system. Well, how do you do that? We have conversations about it, right?
Yeah, you air gap it. I mean, there's no other way.
With philosophers and others, right?
So,
yeah, training your private language model on humanities at the core, and then building technological domain expertise.
That's right.
But keep the heart and soul and mindfulness and ethics at the core.
Correct.
So all decisions.
There'll be evil AIs versus good AIs, just like there are humans, right? I mean, you got the Anthropics of the world trying to make sure they don't end up like OpenAI, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're pursuing perfection, good luck. I mean, they're evil humans, and agents are algorithms are just our beliefs codified. So I don't think you're going to create saint agents and saint AI because perfection doesn't exist enough.
Evil AI. I'm building evil AI and getting funding for it.
But
now we talk about a super, intelligent machine God. Could we have super intelligent machine angels that monitor, right? That we use as guardians? Is that a potentiality, right?
Yeah.
A lot to discuss. This ethics conversation is not going away. And of course, we've got Dr. Christopher DiCarlo, author of Building a God, the Ethics of AI and the Race to Control It. Or maybe have it control us. We'll find out. You can follow him on X at Critical Donkey. And of course, catch his book on Amazon. Thank you so much for landing our lines.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Congratulations on your new book.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow. These evil AIs are coming to get us, Vala. What are we going to do?
Yeah, it's just not deterministic. And the deeper the neural networks, the larger the language. It's just not. It's hard for us to reverse engineer
We're
outcomes.
trying to replicate humans. It's very, very hard.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have, maybe we are the robots, right? Let's start there.
You're dialing in at Davos. It's around 10 o'clock your time or 9 o'clock. You've been there an entire week. Anybody following you on your various platforms, digital platforms, has shared your experiences, at least through wonderful photos and comments. Can you give us a 30-second, 60-second observation about how this Davos was different from previous Davos? You've been to like 10 of these, so you've got plenty of sample space to, and I don't mean about traffic per se. I'm just talking about the tone, the urgency, the topics that were shared. If there's a word cloud, I suspect I know what the biggest word was in the cloud, but how did this Davos differ from the previous dozen you've been to?
Strangely enough, the word cloud last year would have been the same as the word cloud this year, because the man with the word cloud T actually dominated the word cloud. So Trump would have still dominated the conversation. Last year was an inevitability, the belief that the US was going to go into a rat hole. Trump was going to be elected president. It was inevitable. Biden wasn't going to make it. I was quoted saying, it's a US election. Anything could happen. Biden might not run. Somebody might be assassinated. Great. Anyways, everybody called me like when that happened. I'm like, God, this is horrible. This year, right, the conversation is very different. This is like Trump is changing the world. It's setting the tone. And this is going to be very, very different, right? Sustainability is out the window, right? Because it has to be smart sustainability, not just random ideological access sustainability. AI, topic du jour. The US is actually going to out-invest all of us in AI. What are we going to do, right? There's a call to action among Europe to figure out how do we actually scale up, because you have to in order to compete in this space. The third piece was not as apparent to folks, right? Only a few people get this. There's an energy race like no tomorrow. And I think people walking out of Davos did not get that we are competing on cheap energy. If you cannot get cheap energy, you're in trouble. I think you've heard me say this before, but like China is going to get to 0 cents per kilowatt hour. What does that mean for manufacturing? What does that mean for AI? What does that mean for competitiveness, right? They've got the entire robot supply chain figured out, because when their population goes from this to this, they still need people to run their government. And they know exactly what's running it. It's robots. It's not going to be people. So it's a very different game out there. And I think people are starting to understand the geopolitical implications.
It was worth your week of investment. Will you go back next year?
I would go back. It's mostly because of the people that I've been meeting. It's the network of individuals. There's enough great people here trying to do great things that it's worth your time. Great. There's also a lot of junk, a lot of noise. There's the folks that we call the folks that are in for Monte Carlo, Davos. They're just in for like the events. So those folks are there enjoying, kind of saying they're out here. There are folks that are really trying to get work done. Those are the folks that we kind of tend to hang out with. And they're just a lot of folks looking for investments, like ideas and money, right? They're all here. So it's a good place to network if you can get out here.
Terrific. Yeah, well, thanks for all that you shared. We were all living vicariously through you, experiencing Davos from a distance. Next week, we'll be back, episode 388. Ronnie Chef, CEO of Senin Group, will be our guest. Deborah Perry Pisconi and Josh Green, co-founders of Work3 Institute and co-authors of Employment is Dead, How Disruptive Technologies Are Revolutionizing the Way We Work. We try to get at least one author per episode. Last year, we had 70 authors. The year before, we had 70 authors. And you saw with this episode, 2 authors. We're on pace to perhaps cross the 70 author mark for this year as well. So if you have a favorite book, if you have a favorite author, please recommend to Elle Froze, our producer, Ray and myself. You can find us on X and LinkedIn, and we'll do our best to get the authors on the show. If it's Friday, it's DisrupTV. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, we'll see you right in the green room. Take care.